This episode of The Candid Frame is supported by Fujifilm's new integration with Frame.io, Camera to Cloud. A new integration between Fujifilm and Frame.io allows transferring images or video to the web directly from your Fujifilm camera using C2C technology. Find out more by visiting fujifilm-x.com and click Camera to Cloud. We also have the support of Nikon, whose latest camera is the Z8, a mirrorless camera that provides a small but powerful tool for any genre of photography or video. With its 45.7 megapixel sensor and an 8K 60p recording capability, the Z8 provides the means to unleash your creativity. Find out more by visiting nikonusa.com/podcast Z8. On February 19, 1942, President Roosevelt signed off on Executive Order 9066. That order during World War II led to the forced relocation and incarceration of hundreds of thousands of people of Japanese descent, 2/3 of whom were American citizens. Ordered to leave behind homes and businesses, men, women, and children relocated to makeshift communities in the West and Midwest until the end of the war. It's a tragic moment in American history when fear and racism allowed a country to deny people their rights, both as citizens and human beings. This event is likely an objective moment in history for most of us. But for former occupants of these camps and their families, it's a painful legacy that casts a long and lingering shadow. Sandy Sugawara's parents and grandparents were sent to those camps. But the wounds and pain of that time weren't shared with her. It was only after the death of her mother that Sugawara and fellow photographer Catiana Garcia-Kilroy created and produced their work, Show Me the Way to Go Home. The monograph includes photographs of what remains of these camps, as well as historical texts and personal stories. The volume is a loving and respectful acknowledgement of people who suffered the consequence of a country not living up to its ideals. This is Ibarian X, and welcome back to The Candid Frame. All right, Sandy, Catiana, welcome to the show. It's a real pleasure and an honor to have you on here.
Thank you.
I grew up in Southern California, so I had some understanding of the Japanese internment that happened during World War II. But this gave me an excuse to get to dive a little deeper than I have in the past. And I have to say how I was continually surprised by so much that I learned by looking at the photographs and reading, the poetry and the essays that were contained in the book. I'd like to start with, for those who may not be familiar with it, an explanation of, Executive Order 9066, what led up to it, and what the result was of it.
It was after Pearl Harbor was bombed, and they decided that they wanted to. They decided Japanese Americans were dangerous to have on the West Coast, so they had an order that everyone who was living in these so-called exclusion areas were going to be moved to mass facilities, and they were first sent to fairgrounds and slept in horse stalls while these camps were being built. And then everybody was moved en masse to these 10 camps. There were 120,000 Japanese Americans moved to, people of Japanese descent, immigrants and their children were moved there.
Yeah, I live in Altadena, California, which is probably only 15, 20 minutes from the Santa Anita racetrack, which was one of the locations where, the Japanese Americans were first, processed, for lack of a better word, and then eventually set off to the camps. And I remember being there and just sort of imagining what that big space must have looked like with all those thousands and thousands of people that were there.
My mother said the racetracks, the so-called, where they stayed when they were waiting for the camps to be built, were just awful. They were manure. They were, their horses had been there, and she said it was just an awful experience.
The thing that triggered this project was your mom passing away and the discovery of this box by her bedside.
Right.
What did you find in there?
Well, after my mother passed away, I was cleaning out her room and I found this metal box, and I didn't know what was in it. And I opened it, and much to my surprise, there were several things from my father, including his wallet. And I opened his wallet, and he had his golf card and his card from the grocery store and different things. But I also found some meal passes from Amachi, which is the camp where he was staying. And I realized if he was carrying this around with him all this time, that he hadn't really gone over it, that it still really upset him. And I also noticed that he had his Boy Scout card. And when he was in camp, they investigated him because his father was a community leader, and they wanted to see if he could be a spy. He was in high school. And one of the things, everybody they interviewed said that he was a great kid. And the Boy Scouts particularly stood up for him and said he was, a peach. And so I guess maybe that's why he carried the card around all the time.
I know that when my dad passed away and we had to go through his things, it was, obviously a difficult thing to sort of have to do. And one of the strange things sort of about it was seeing my dad's life sort of consolidated into a bunch of stuff, that you had sort of parsed through. I didn't make any discoveries like you did, but that must have been quite striking emotionally. Because you're sort of grieving and you're lost, but then you get this box with a whole bunch of questions that come out as a result.
Absolutely. No, it was very striking. And I was kind of shocked because my dad seemed like a pretty happy-go-lucky guy and was always up and cheerful. And another thing that was in there was his father's autopsy. I then filed for the records of his death, and it said that they had diagnosed him for hemorrhoids, but in fact he had cancer. Another thing that was in there was a sermon by a minister who was very sympathetic to the plight of the Japanese Americans, and he started out with, "Why have thou forsaken me?" And there was also a autograph book from all his friends where they wrote down the address of which camp they were going to, and their address of the camps when they were leaving. So he had kept all this close to him and never mentioned it to me. So it was pretty shocking.
You started the project pretty soon after. Tell me why it sort of launched it so quickly, because that's one of the things I was kind of surprised that it didn't take more gestation, it seems like you just immediately dived into it.
Right. Well, so Catiana and I had gone to a photography gathering of friends. All of us actually had taken a workshop with Sam Abel, and we all met in Los Angeles. And while we were there, Catiana and I drove over to Manzanar because I'd never been to any of the camps before, and we photographed them, and we realized that there was a lot of history there, and we thought, well, maybe we should start photographing the camps, but I didn't have a real project in mind. We were just intrigued by the possibilities, and I even told my mother, and she said, "Why would you want to go to them? They were terrible places, and they were just awful, and there's so much dust." And I said, "Well, I want to capture all that." Then when she was in the hospital, and she talked so much about the camps and how awful it was, and she kept saying, like, why didn't our friends and the community stand up for us, and why were the Japanese Americans singled out? They were also fighting the Germans and the Italians, and why didn't they face mass incarceration? And why didn't we fight more for our rights? So I thought if we went to the camps, we could sort of get the answers to a lot of those questions. And I talked to Catiana about it, and she was very interested in this too. And so we thought that, I wanted to do something after my mother died, and that seemed like the right thing to do.
Catiana, when you began this project with Sandy, how much knowledge did you have yourself about this period?
So I wasn't completely ignorant. I had heard vaguely that there had been incarceration camps during World War II in the US, because I had seen some photographs by Dorothea Lange and Ansel Adams, but I didn't know the extent of what had happened. I thought that maybe a few dozens of Japanese Americans had been rounded up and taken to these camps. I didn't know that it was whole families for a total of 120,000 people that had been sent to these camps. So it was something very new to me. And so when I heard about it, I thought, if I, who am very interested in this type of issues, know nothing about it, this really needs to be known much more.
In looking in both of your works, even before this project, it seems like each of you had an interest in spaces. Mm-hmm. That don't necessarily have people in them, but are suggestive about the presence of people in them. And it seemed like this project was sort of a natural segue for the work that you have already created. But now there was an emotional resonance that accompanied it. How do you think that influenced the way that you saw these scenes and chose to photograph them?
I was very interested in capturing the sense of isolation, the sense of loneliness, the sense that when you were at that camp, you felt that nobody in the world knew you were there, and we actually did take some photos with people in them, but it seemed much more powerful when there were no people present in these places. I think also that this does play to our our style of shooting, that we had done a lot of that beforehand, but it also it was very important in the storytelling, I think, not to have people in the pictures.
And how about for you, Catiana?
Yes. For me, it was a big challenge to try to represent memory in photography. And because photography, to me, is a way to transmit subjectivity, how you feel about things. I thought it was probably the perfect medium to do what Sandy was mentioning, how to transmit the experience of being in the camps. Before then, I had done a lot of urban photography, but generally without people. So that I found interesting your comment about us leaning into spaces without people. And I had been mostly interested in the traces that people leave in cities. So the transition to this project at the beginning was a bit intimidating because I hadn't done landscape in a systematic way. But suddenly it's not that it did take me a little bit out of my comfort zone, but it was very natural to start looking for traces of people in spaces, of other lives that had happened in these spaces.
I think another thing is I wanted people to feel like they were there. I wanted them to feel like it was their experience. We wanted a book that felt very immersive. And I think that by not having people in the photos, that people could put themselves in those locations.
I think that the essays and the little anecdotes of the people and their experiences there really help with that. Mm-hmm. There's a couple of stories in there of like an artist, for example, who had been a painter before being interned, and then later became teaching painting there, and you can see through his work a sense of what it was like to be there in the moment. Mm-hmm. And then to see the sort of the starkness of the place now, it sort of provided a bridge between what seemed like a lifeless landscape, and then still being able to sort of tap into what the experience must have been like when it was filled with thousands of people.
It's interesting that you single him out, because he's one of the reasons that I wanted to go to the camps. I had a small book of his paintings, and I felt that he really captured that mood. And then I heard that he started the art school at Topaz because he felt that that's art could save them, that while they were in prison, that if they had art, that they would not lose their soul. And I could see that feeling in his paintings. So one of the things I wanted to do when I went to Topaz was to shoot the moon over Topaz, which is one of his rather well-known paintings.
One of the challenges of making these kinds of photographs is that the structures, the infrastructure that existed there at these different locations, there's still some evidence of some things, and another, they're virtually gone. And photographically, I can imagine sort of the challenge of trying to not to capture images that just don't document what's there, mm-hmm. but to provide a sense of, as you said, a feeling. How did your collaboration sort of help you? How do you think it helped both of you to create your images, to be able to achieve that? Was there sort of a riffing that existed between the two of you that was helpful?
Yeah, that's interesting you put it that way, but there was. We would walk into these areas. They're huge open expanses of land, and one person would go one place, one person would go another, and we'd sort of come together and talk, and we'd show each other what we were shooting, and we'd say, oh, that looks really great, and maybe you could try that or that. And then we go off by ourselves for a while again and walk around. But I hadn't thought of that, but there was a bit of a riffing. We would sort of like, there were a couple that she showed me that I was, wow, that's great. I would go back and maybe do this and this, or we'd look at we'd go back at night and look at our photos and say, we really have to go at sunrise, or we really have to go at high noon when the sun is really strong.
And how was it for you, Catiana?
Yes, so I think it was important not to plan too much in terms of what shootings each one of us was going to do. So as Sandy says, so we would be wondering intuitively where we would want it to shoot, and then the exchange, particularly at night, after each session. Really, helped us in terms of redirecting our shootings. But we didn't talk much, during the day while we were shooting. It was more after we ended the sessions at the end of the day. So I think each one of us was in a certain zone.
Yeah.
Doing the photographs, which I think to convey what we meant, what we're talking about, the subjective experience of being there was important.
A photographer friend of mine said to me, did the two of you get in any fights? There's a perfect location and both of you want to do that view? And I said no, because even when we were standing in the same place, somehow our photos were different. We would frame it differently, different lenses. And so I think we were both just really focused on getting the best possible photos from that location. We probably weren't going to go back because, and we, was be there for 4 or 5 days. So we didn't have those kind of disputes.
I was watching a propaganda documentary that was made during that time, and oh man, the talk about polishing a turd. They really went all out in terms of making this seem like, the Japanese Americans were more than glad to give up everything and for the sake of being good Americans, to abandon their homes, their businesses, their lives, and to be shipped out at these places. And the truth of it is that it was incredibly traumatic, not just for the adults, but also the children, and as in one of the essays in the book talks about the generational passing on of trauma in a variety of sort of different ways. For you, what I know that your parents didn't want to sort of talk about it much, but how do you think it impacted their bringing you up? How do you think that influenced their parentage and what they wanted you to focus on and aspire to?
They were very focused on fitting in. They didn't give any of us Japanese names. They gave us very Anglo-Saxon names. Sandy, my brother's Alfred. And that's true with a lot of kids my generation. Well, we're not kids anymore, but when I was growing up. And they didn't, they wanted us to just fit in. And there wasn't, one of the things the government did is they said that people could leave the camps, but they couldn't go into, they had to scatter. They tried to scatter them. They said, they claimed it was for the sake of the Japanese Americans, that if there were just 2 or 3 here or there, that they would not attract so much negative attention. But what happened is that in most places, there weren't a lot of other Japanese Americans, so you didn't have a real strong sense of your culture. When I went to high school, there was one other Japanese American girl and one other Chinese girl, and that was my whole, reference point for being Asian American. So I think that as I grew older and I made more friends who were Asian American, and I studied more about Asian American literature and different things, I got more of a sense of it. But I feel like the next generation after us is much more active, and they're asking a lot of questions. They're actively visiting the sites. They're studying about what happened, and they have a much stronger sense of what it means to be Asian American.
Catiana, what did you find yourself learning as a result of, talking with Sandy and her sharing her family stories, and you visiting these sites and having a tactile experience of these spaces and the history that existed there?
Well, it's very different, from reading about this experience and going to these places and experiencing, what the Japanese American community went through. But it was also, that this what happened then is doesn't relate just to the Japanese American community. It relates also to other minorities. And something quite interesting as the book has come out, and I was interacting with other people. So I found quite a few people original from the Middle East or North Africa who relate to this experience because of what happened after 9/11. So even people that I'm now actually I'm living in Cairo since last December, So when I talk about this project, I found people who were living in the U.S. at that time and decided to go back, to their country because of how they were singled out and a sense of rejection that they found at that time. So I thought that through this project that this is something that is not from the past, it's not from World War II, but there's still risks of similar situations being repeated.
Tell me about some of the locations, because in reading some of the land on which some of these camps were located, where were sold off like to private owners for farmland. Others have markers to indicate what had happened there. Talk to me about the sort of the diversity of the legacy of these spaces and how they are, if they are at all, sort of acknowledged for what happened on that land.
So they're of very different. They have very different profiles. So 3 of them are national parks. So like well-established sites, well organized. Others are just supported because of some private foundation supporting it. And others, which was quite a surprise, are still there because certain individuals from the towns nearby took an interest. So, for example, there are 2 cases of one of a school principal, John Hopper in Amache, who took an interest, and just with his own effort, he organized the students at his school to clean up the camp, to maintain it. And so the camp is there thanks to all the work and generosity that he had throughout all this time. And the same happened with Topaz in Utah. So something that was surprising also was that despite what happened, we found people who had nothing to do with the Japanese American community in the towns close to the camps that took an interest, and it's thanks to them that the sites have some degree of preservation and can still be visited.
And then you want to talk about Poston and Gila River?
Oh yes, of course. There's the 2 of the camps are in Indian reservations, which they very reluctantly authorized for the camps to be built there. So that was also something that gives a very different perspective and personality to, we can say camps have a personality to the camps. And a very paradoxical situation that the camps were in the middle of an Indian reservation.
That was one of the big surprises. I had not known that, and it just made something already absurd even more absurd.
Right.
That Native Americans were basically providing the land for others who were suffering the very same kind of discrimination to basically, facilitate this, this terrible thing.
Yeah, they weren't happy about it. And one of the other interesting things about people sort of stepping up to preserve these places is, as you pointed out, in Arkansas, they aren't national parks, but in one case with Jerome, a farmer, even though he's farming the land, he kept a tower up, and he welcomes visitors and gives you a tour of his farm, and got together with some Japanese Americans to have a little memorial built so that people could always find the farm. And there's a former mayor named Rosalie Gould who took an interest in Rower, and there was the camp had disappeared and was sold off as farmland, but she raised money to have a memorial there so that people from Rower could come back and find their camp. So as Catiana said, and then John Hopper was just amazing. And my parents were in Amachi, and I went to Amachi, and he has his students cutting the grass, giving tours, cleaning the place up. He goes on eBay and looks for things that have to do with Amachi, and it has this little museum he's set up. He's really been an incredible supporter of preserving the legacy of Amachi.
Yeah. The found items, like the children's toys, because half the population of these camps are children. So it must have been kind of strange and odd to find these toys and other objects associated with children in such a sort of barren and stark place, especially knowing what had happened.
Yeah, it was again this disconnect. You see these whimsical toys, and it's in the middle of the desert. Catiana, you want to talk about the children's village?
Yes, there was one of the most surprising. We found many surprises, but one of them was the fact that there was an orphanage in one of the camps, in Manzanar. So when the camps were set up, it was decided that orphans were also a threat to national security. So they looked for not only there was some segregation going on in California, so there were orphanages just for Japanese American kids, but there were others where they were not segregated. But they went looking into the files to see which kids had some Japanese blood, so that they would be taken to the orphanage.
Yeah, that one ID photo of that one child who, once they discovered that he was Japanese, that exactly. They took him out of the orphanage and put him into the camps, and it's just... Yes, he discovered because of this that he was of Japanese descent. His mother was Japanese American and his father was Franco-Irish.
And they had babies in the orphanage, infants that they brought from the orphanages in California and brought them to the camp.
The people, they often, you hear the term the banality of evil, and people often associate it with the atrocities against the Jews and homosexuals in Europe during World War II. But Americans weren't too far behind, Mm-hmm. And when people learned that Hitler, learned everything that he did to the Jews by observing what was being done to blacks here in the United States, it's like, we taught them how to do all that stuff. They came here to learn how to do all those things.
One of the interesting things for Japanese Americans when they went to Arkansas is they saw Jim Crow South, and they were just shocked at how blacks were treated. And one woman told me that one man actually told me that his mother took him into a store, and he saw a sign that said whites and colored, and he figured he was colored because he was kicked out of California because he wasn't white. And he started going in the colored restroom, and the clerk said, no, you go into the white. And he said, why? You just kicked me out. And anyway, he said he realized that there were people in Arkansas who were being treated worse than he was. And he just thought that was awful. So, it was, and again, they would see on the bus the same thing happen, that, blacks had to sit in the back and they were told to sit in the front with the whites. And they said it made no sense to them whatsoever.
That kind of stuff rarely makes sense at all.
Yeah.
And that just sort of reinforces the absurdity of it all. As you guys started coming together with the work, had a book been sort of the goal from the very beginning? How did that evolve for you?
I think once we decided that we were going to, take this serious as a project, our thought was always a book. And we were in a workshop with Alex Webb and Rebecca Norris Webb and talked to them about it. And they helped us, conceptualize what the book should be about and how it should be structured. So, and we both love photo books. So I think that was always our goal once we got serious about it.
So tell me about the collaboration. So going out and making pictures together is one thing. Sitting down and collaborating and putting together a book, it's difficult enough doing it solo. Right?
Exactly. Well, one thing I should let Catiana talk about is at first she didn't feel that she should be involved in this because she's not Japanese. And so you want to talk a little bit?
Yes. So I had all this self-doubt at the beginning that I didn't make Sandy aware, but I was thinking, am I entitled to talk about this experience? I have nothing to do with the Japanese Americans. Until I talked to a photographer that we both talked to, a Japanese American photographer. And without asking anything, he said, Catiana, I think it's really important that you're part of this project, because this allows the project to go beyond the Japanese American community, not just because so that it's better known, but also because people feel that this doesn't relate just to the Japanese American community, that this goes well beyond that. So this linked to what I was saying earlier, about other minorities, but also about one of the messages that we also thought it was important in the book is that how certain individuals didn't follow the crowd and stood up, even with very sort of single acts of generosity, of support that made a huge difference to the people who were being sent to the camps.
For instance, my grandparents on my mother's side were able to hold on to their farm because their neighbor, who was white, took care of their farm and were very honest, gave them the profits from the farm, paid their taxes. Many other Japanese Americans, when they went into the camps, they left their farms with Caucasians back, and they, basically stole from them. So they had nothing to go back to. But my family benefited by the honesty and the willingness of this Caucasian family to work the farm and protect it. So how did we work together? Well, it was complicated by the fact that in the middle of the project, COVID broke out, and then she went to Spain. So, and then she would come back whenever we were going to go work on, fly someplace. We did a lot of Zoom. I don't know if you can see the wall behind me, but it's a great big wall, and I would make printouts, and we'd sequence on the wall. She did the same thing in her place. We eventually divided up the chapters, and she focused on half of the camps. I focused on the other half. We focused on researching those camps, and then we took the first stab at sequencing. Usually after we shot, we would sit down before we would separate from each other, and we would go through and we would talk about the theme of the camp and which photos really told that story. And so we would kind of pare down the photos that we were going to focus on when we were in person. But then it was a process that we spent a lot of time on Zoom.
Yeah. Can you give me an example of one of the sites and how that sort of took shape for you?
I can describe it for Amachi, maybe because that was the first one we did. When we were at Amachi, we picked out the photos that we thought could really build the narrative we wanted from there, and that was the one where my grandmother was, and she talked about how the people were in a lot of pain, but there was also a lot of resilience, and the fact that they planted so many trees and flowers and turned the desert into quite a beautiful place in a very short amount of time. So we were very focused on, capturing both of those kind of moods. And we went through and we sat down in our hotel room, often with a glass of wine, some food, and we would go through the photos and pick out the ones of hers that we liked and the ones of mine that we liked. And we particularly were looking for photos that told different aspects of the story. Then we came back. I made printouts of hers and mine, and then I sat on the wall. I pinned them on the wall behind me, and we moved them around, and we figured out kind of. And first we worked with small prints, postcard size, and we just figured out what was the story we were telling. And then we realized, we had way too many, and we were trying to pare them down. And I think at the end we were really happy with the story that it told.
It used to be that if you preferred a compact camera body, you were giving up a lot in terms of features and functions. The Nikon Z8 proves that wrong. For still photographers, it includes a 45.7 megapixel full-frame sensor with a base ISO of 64. For videographers, it records up to 125 minutes in 4K UHD at 60p or 90 minutes in 8K at 30p. It's a small camera, but it delivers whether you practice portrait, wildlife, street, or any other kind of photography, or you just want to document those special moments with your family. It's a system that provides you access to a diverse line of Z-mount lenses, as well as legacy F-mount lenses using the FTZ2 mount adapter. So whether you're upgrading from a DSLR or this is your first mirrorless Nikon camera, you have an amazing selection of lenses to choose from. Find out more about the Z8 and how it can make a difference in your photography by visiting nikonusa.com/podcast Z8. And we so appreciate your financial support. Many of the things that we've accomplished wouldn't have been possible without you. We've grown and improved because you believed in what we've done and continue to do for you and the greater photographic community. And your financial support is a big part of that because your donations help to keep this thing running. We run a really lean ship here, but the shows still cost time and money to produce. You might not be able to help us with the first part, but you can certainly help us with the latter by becoming a Patreon supporter today. You can do this by contributing $5, $10, $20 or more a month by visiting patreon.com/thecandidframe. By doing so, you help us to produce a show dedicated to great and insightful conversations about what it means to be a photographer and lead a creative life. Again, it's patreon.com/candidframe. Thanks. The incorporation of the text, the essays, the poetry, the illustrations, how did that fit into the plan for the book? How did that evolve?
Originally, we had thought about including the narrative in each of the chapters. So we had selected a person that reflected what we thought represented the main features of the camp. So in one of the first versions of the book, because we did several versions, like 3, 4, we actually had featured the story, which was mixed with the photographs. No? And then as we were doing the editing, with the designer that was helping us, David Chicky, we decided to compile all the stories at the end. So still keeping the features that we had selected for the stories that we had under each camp, but having them all together. And if you, one thing that was important for us in the story is that still to represent the subjective experience of being in the camps was to use quotes from the people in each story, so that the way the way that people reading the stories could relate to these people would be more emotional rather than something factual about the lives of these people.
The design of the book went through many changes, and we started out, with a book dummy, and we thought we had the design we wanted. We worked on it about a year, going through different iterations, and then, as Catiana mentioned, we were working with David Chicky, who is the co-founder of Radius, our publisher, and about 2 months before we were going to go to Verona for it to be printed, he and his staff said, we decided this arrangement isn't working. And we were like, what? And he said, we want all the photos in the front. You say you want an immersive experience. Mixing the photos and the text and the vintage and the old photos is not creating an immersive experience. And it'll be better if you have all the photos in the front, and then in the back we have the stories, and then and the paintings and the old photos. And for a few days, Catiana and I were like, "What?" Because we had been living with this book for about 2 years. But once we calmed down, it made sense, and I'm really glad that they did that. I think it was the right thing to do, and I'm quite happy with it. But when you've been living with something for a couple of years and you think this is how it's going to be, and then all of a sudden it's not, it took a little while for my head to quit spinning. But once I saw it and I realized what it was going to be, I thought that was the right thing to do.
Yeah, I think it works this way.
Yeah. Good.
Because I can understand how going back and forth between the images and the text can be disruptive. And the design of the book is beautiful. I mean, I love the paper. It's just great, and I love the transitional paper that you use. Mm-hmm. I don't know exactly what it is, but it was just I love the attention to detail.
Well, we have rice paper, and that was one of Catiana's first things when we were talking to David Chicky. She said she really wanted rice paper, and I personally love rice paper, but I thought I didn't know how practical it would be, how easy it would be to. And he said, "Well, there is some rice paper that's pretty strong," and he sent for it, and it took forever to get there, but we waited and waited for it. It was when there was a supply chain issues, and it took quite a while for it to get there. But the rice paper, at first we were going to use it in a lot more pages, but it turned out to be pretty expensive. So I like his design of starting each chapter with the rice paper, and then the paper that the photos are on is more polished, and I think the photos benefit from that. And then the stories that the paper that the stories are on is a different sort of paper, just a little bit coarser. And I think sort of having different papers and separating that out works really, really well. And I'm happy that we had a printer and a binder who was able to handle that so beautifully.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like a printer, really enjoys complications.
Yeah. Yeah. The printer was amazing. We were on press, and it was an incredible process to watch.
Yeah. I mean, my dad was a pressman. So I have fond memories of being in his print shop, and I can just imagine seeing your work coming out of the machine and getting spit out over and over and over again, and taking a look at it, and being able to sort of collaborate with basically an artisan in creating your book must have been a wonderful experience.
Oh, it was. They were incredible. I mean, they spoke Italian and we spoke English, but you just sort of point to things, and they were so intuitive, and they could make changes just like that, and it came out just what you wanted. It's really incredible.
So tell me about how you got connected with your publisher, and what did you need to do in order to help facilitate this book being made? Because a lot of times photographers have to come up with a certain amount of funds in order to even get their book to be considered viable for publication. So what was that whole journey like for you, for the two of you?
We met David Chicky in a workshop that Alex Webb and Rebecca Norris Webb had with David, and I loved all the comments he made and all the suggestions he made. I knew it was really hard to get published by Radius, so we sent him a note saying we're working on this book. We'd like to hire him as our designer. We understood that there was absolutely no, connection between hiring him and being published by Radius. Is a separate process. But we really liked his sensibilities, and he said, he was interested in the project, that he had a small window that he could take us in. So we worked with him on the project book as a private designer, and we asked if he could help us figure out how to get it printed, and he said yes, that was part of his contract for being a designer. Then after working with him for about 6 months, we were going to raise money for the printing on Kickstarter, and so we had the Kickstarter thing all set up. We were ready to go. I wanted to use his name in the Kickstarter, but I was very careful not to say it was a Radius book, just that, but I said, please read this, make sure you're okay with this. And he said, I need to talk to you. Okay, I need to talk to you before you go to Kickstarter. And so I said, are you going to break my heart or something? Because I thought that sounded ominous. And I called up Catiana, and he said, I need to talk to you immediately. And Catiana was like in a meeting. And so she said, okay, just go ahead and talk to him. And then he told me, we want to publish your book. And he wanted to tell me before I went on Kickstarter, I think we said that on Kickstarter. Said, now I know you can't give me an answer. You have to talk to Catiana to see how she feels. And I said, oh, I can assure you she's going to be very happy. I know I can speak for her. So it was great. And working with Radius has been fabulous. They are top notch. All the people who work there are so smart and so good and so easy to work with, and so collaborative, and they really want to support the artists. So it's just been a great experience.
And they're passionate about what they do, no? So you feel that they put their whole soul and heart, no, in what they're doing.
Yeah, and so that's why. Once they took it on, so we raised money from Kickstarter, and that was the money to cover the printing costs, and then they. So we were all sort of ready to go. We had raised the money. It was scheduled at the printers, and then that's when they said that they wanted to rearrange the book. And I think that once they said that when David said when he's hired as a private designer, he gives his input, but he tries to be guided by his clients. But when we were then a Radius book, I think that they spend a lot more time thinking, this is going to be in their library. So what is it exactly they want the book to say? So I'm really happy that they did insist on that. The other thing that happened was when we were on our way to Verona, they said, we just made a printout of the cover, and I think we're going to change the cover. And again, we said, what? And he had already warned us. He said that the last time he was there, he changed a cover when it was going to press. But again, I think it was the right thing to do. I love the cover. I love the cover they had before, but for various reasons, they didn't think it would work out. And I've just learned to trust them because I think they make such wonderful, exquisite books. So I'm quite happy with how everything turned out.
This is a question for the both of you. How did seeing your work through his eyes, in terms of him designing the book, how did that allow you to sort of like rediscover your own work as a result of what he was doing with it?
We made most of the selections of photographs, but he did suggest some changes. And he also suggested some changes in the sequencing. So just with those tweaks that did make a difference. It was, really, I think it was like seeing photographs from different angles, and through his eyes. And we, I think we, just the way the book is designed, at least for me, gave me a different way of looking at my photographs. So I think it put me in another level.
How so?
So in terms of one always knows that the design of the book is really important to get for the feel of the book. But I didn't realize that even my photographs that I know very well. Every time I see the photograph, I can see myself where I took it, what I was feeling at the moment when I was taking it. I wasn't expecting that I could get into another sort of interesting meaning dimension into my own photographs. So that was a very interesting discovery.
That's nice.
On the what can editing do? What can good editing do to your own photographs?
Yeah, I think when he made sequencing suggestions, I think we both saw things in the photographs that we hadn't noticed before. Also, I worked with him pretty closely on the box, and his whole idea of making that section come alive, and he resequenced that, and the way he wanted to use some of the photos, and David thinks of these books as very much an art object, and I thought I did too, but he brought it up to a whole different level.
Yeah,
I learned a lot.
Yeah, that section. As soon as you open up the box, there's this. It's kind of like a prelude, because it focuses on the box that you found next to your mother, and I thought that was really kind of fascinating because it took me a moment to sort of figure it out. Right, because at first I thought maybe it's something that was inserted into the book. I go, oh no, this is a part of the book, and it was a very a neat way to immediately experience this in a personal level through your story, as opposed to just seeing it as a collection of a book that is illustrating a collective experience. Before you can dive in, you go through this, and then that sort of like sets the stage for how I will experience everything that comes forward. I thought that was really brilliant.
Yeah, and I think originally at one of our versions of the book, we were just going to have that box thing as like the introductory section. So we had my family story, and then we had the camps, and it was going to be like. And I like the fact that he took the box and put it in the inside jacket.
Kind of like a box in a box.
Yeah, box in a box.
So, what's been the response to the book?
It's been really good. I mean, we've been really happy with it. I've heard from a lot of people, and I've heard from people who have said that they had no idea. I've heard from teachers who said that they felt that the visual emphasis would really help them, teach it to their class. And that was one of the things that we really hoped, was that by taking a visual approach, that it might bring in people who otherwise wouldn't sit down and read a textbook, necessarily. So, and I think so many people that I hadn't heard from in a long time, called me, so they got the book, so they really loved it, and it had really touched them. So it's been nice.
Have you heard from many people who were of your generation or subsequent generations for whom this experience was a pivotal one in terms of their responses to the book?
Subsequent meaning younger or older?
Younger.
Younger
you were younger. Yeah.
Yeah. So I have heard from people of younger generation, and they've said that everyone I've heard from has been on pilgrimages, and the pilgrimages are when the survivors and their children go back to the camps and visit. And they said that the book reminds them of the pilgrimages, and they want a copy because they can pass it on to their children. I've also heard from people who were in the camps. There's a woman who I'm told is in her 90s, and my neighbor bought the book and took it, she's not Japanese American, and she took it to a friend of hers who's in a knitting group with a woman who's Japanese American, and they took it to her, and they said she sat there. She's blind, but she sat there with a looking glass and not a microscope, but a telescope. No, whatever it's called.
Magnifying glass?
Yeah, magnifying glass. Sat there with a magnifying glass and was looking at the book, and they said she spent about an hour doing it. And then now they're organizing. They want me to come and talk to this whole group of Japanese Americans who some of them either went through the camps or their parents did. And they, this will give them an opportunity to hold on to the memories, because they recognize the camps and they feel that the stories, even though we weren't exactly telling their stories, the stories just resonate.
Yeah. Catiana, what has this experience meant for you?
Well, from different perspectives. One from the theme, it was an amazing way of getting myself immersed into this topic, learn more about it. Visit all these places in deep America that I would have never been otherwise, and learn about all these camps in these remote places, and then as a collaborative project, working with Sandy, it was an amazing experience as well. That I think. Each one of us individually, even if I had done a different project, would not have been able to achieve what we achieved. So it was both, from the topic as well as from the experience of working collaboratively in such a book.
And Sandy, for you, what do you appreciate about having made this a collaborative effort rather than just doing it by yourself?
So I think doing a photography project is it's a lot of work, and it also can be very draining, and you go through these periods where you think, oh, is this really any good, and you go through periods, oh, I have so much to do, and then you get really excited. And I think so several photographers have asked me kind of the opposite of like, wasn't it really hard doing a project? And, did you have to, what happens when you disagreed? I found that it made it much easier because when one of us would sort of lose steam, the other one would, have a lot of energy and kind of carry the ball. And then you could pass the ball back and forth. And, in any project, you have disappointments, you have things that don't turn out. And I think we were able to just keep each other going. We had someone whose judgment we trusted to bounce ideas off each other. If I took a photo and Catiana said, no, that doesn't work, I trusted her that, maybe it just didn't work. And I think that the project is better, and it also got done more quickly because we were both working on it. And I would really encourage people to consider collaborations for photography projects. I think that there's especially if it's someone who you respect and you trust, and you're on the same wavelength.
There's an image in the book that serves to provide the title for the book. Show Me the Way to Go Home. Tell me the story behind that.
Okay, it's actually Show Me the Way to Go to Home.
Go to home.
So this is a graffiti that we found on the walls of the jail that still stands in Tule Lake, which was a high security camp where they would take the Japanese American descents that they considered disloyals. And one of the people that had been imprisoned within this jail, within the camp, had written this graffiti in one of the walls, which after doing some research, we think it's a misquote from a very popular song at the time, called Show Me the Way to Go Home. And, so for us, it was a very moving graffiti because it was probably, what everybody, it was everybody was trying to do, in everybody that was there in the camps.
Yeah, it's poignant, heartbreaking, and apt.
Yeah. No, the minute we saw it, we thought that's the title because they just really wanted to go home. That's all they wanted.
Well, my last question that I ask each guest is I ask them to recommend a photographer for our listeners to discover and explore, and it can be anyone. Someone you've long admired or someone you've recently discovered. So who would that photographer be and why? And we'll start with you, Catiana.
Okay, so there is a Spanish photographer called David Jimenez, who was a pioneer in photo books. So he published a book that was called Infinite. It's a mixture of abstract and referential photography, black and white. The book, I'm not going to tell exactly, it's a puzzle. No? I'm not going to say what is the result of the puzzle, but once you discover what is the logic of the book, it's very surprising. So he's an abstract photographer, but very poetic, and still with enough references to reality, but makes it it's a very moving photography. And his name is David Jimenez.
Thank you. And Sandy?
Well, I love photo books. And so the name I want to mention is Susan K. Grant. She has done some amazing artist books. And I wasn't that familiar with artist books, the hand-built books by photographers until the last couple of years. And I took a workshop with her. Her books themselves are quite exquisite. She, I think, has about a dozen. And then she introduced her class to just amazing variety of artist books. And so that's my new obsession right now.
Well, thank you so much to both of you. I appreciate your time and for sharing such a gorgeous book with me.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks to Sandy and Catiana for joining us. Learn more about their respective bodies of work by visiting sandysugawara.com and Catiana Garcia-Kilroy.com. If you're a fan of our work, you can write reviews on whatever service you use to listen to podcasts and share a favorite episode on social networks, be it Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. Remember to use the hashtag #TheCandidFrame. You can support us financially as well by contributing via PayPal or Patreon. Links are in the show notes or on the website. Thanks to Timothy Floyd for his recent contribution. We've also relaunched our newsletter if you want to receive updates on everything related to TCF, including book recommendations, announcements for special events and workshops, not only from us, but also some of our guests. Please sign up by visiting our website. And if you can't find every show episode on whatever service you use to listen to podcasts, download the Candid Frame app, available for Apple iOS and Android. And because of your generosity, it's free to download and use. No additional purchases are required. The Candid Frame's audio engineer is Martin Taylor, who you can find at theothermartintaylor.com. And the show's senior producer is Cynthia Parker. And this is Ibadian X, and this is The Candid Frame.